And the question I asked was, were you investigated for this expansion of the signal group to include a journalist?
The White House conducted an investigation, and my understanding is the Department of Defense is still conducting an investigation.
Was any disciplinary action taken?
From the White House Investigation Center?
Yes.
No, the use of signal was not only authorized, it's still authorized and highly recommended.
At the time, you took responsibility for having added a journalist inadvertently to a signal chat. But it doesn't seem to me that the administration's taken any action to make sure this doesn't happen again. There's been no consequences, and yet the president continues to denounce those who leak information.
I'm sure Secretary Hegseth says he didn't share any classified information, but the fact of the matter is there are 2 investigations going on at the Pentagon precisely to determine in an objective and independent way whether classified information was shared.
Thank you to all the nominees, your families, your willingness to serve our nation. And if I might, Mr. Waltz, or forgive me, Colonel, Congressman Waltz, my thanks to you and to your wife, Julia, who's also served our nation, as you mentioned in introduction, in combat, and to your family. I want to get to the larger questions of the UN and the UN mission, but in your role in the Army, in the House, as National Security Advisor, you have long handled classified and highly sensitive information. We both know signal is not an appropriate, secure means of communicating highly sensitive information, and yet on March 24th, the Atlantic magazine published a series of signal messages, including sensitive information about a U.S. military operation against the Houthis in Yemen, involving you and several other Trump officials. Were you investigated for this disclosure of sensitive operational information on signal?
Thank you, Senator. And that engagement was driven by and recommended by the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency, by the Biden administration, CISA guidance.
I'm sorry.
And I have here, well, just the use of signal.
Share information on signal.
The use of, no, excuse me, the use of signal is not only as an encrypted app is not only authorized, it was recommended in Biden's, the Biden era CISA guidance. And in fact, if you just, it says here, I'll read it to you. Use only end-to-end encrypted communications. Adopt a free messaging application to secure communications that guarantees end-to-end encryption, particularly if you are a highly targeted individual, such as Signal or similar apps. CISA recommends end-to-end encryption messaging on both government and personal devices.
For sensitive military
operational
information?
Of course, Senator. There was no classified information exchanged.
For sensitive military this, you were sharing details about an upcoming airstrike and the time of launch and the potential targets. I mean, this was demonstrably sensitive information. And the question I asked was, were you investigated for this expansion of the signal group to include a journalist?
The White House conducted an investigation, and my understanding is the Department of Defense is still conducting an investigation.
Was any disciplinary action taken?
From the White House Investigation Center?
Yes.
No, the use of signal was not only authorized, it's still authorized and highly recommended.
Would you recommend the use of signal for classified information to be shared between folks who have access to?
Again, we followed the recommendation, almost the demand, to use end-to-end encryption, but there was no classified information shared.
Did you speak to Secretary Hegseth about his decision to share detailed information on the specifics of an imminent military strike?
What we spoke about, Senator, was a highly successful mission that did something that the Biden administration did not do, was actually target the Houthi leadership. We subsequently saw a ceasefire, an increase in shipping, and a drop in attacks on our ships.
Well, look, here's what I hear on this exchange, and I want to get to the UN point. at the time, you took responsibility for having added a journalist inadvertently to a signal chat. But it doesn't seem to me that the administration's taken any action to make sure this doesn't happen again. There's been no consequences, and yet the president continues to denounce those who leak information. We both know Signal is not a secure way to convey classified information. And I was hoping to hear from you that you had some sense of regret over sharing what was very sensitive, timely information about a military strike on a commercially available app that's not, as we both know, the appropriate way to share such critical information.
Again, Senator, I think where we have a fundamental disagreement is there was no classified information on that chat.
I'm going to move on for a moment, but we've got plenty more to discuss on that point. China in the UN system, there was plenty of agreement on this side of the dais, and I think with you, that we need to combat anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias in the UN. We need to ensure taxpayer dollars are well spent. We need to engage in our world, and from your service on the China Task Force, you know very well what a central challenge for us China is. Yet across organizations, the ITU, the FAO, UNESCO, WIPO, I think the only way we successfully push back on China's influence is by being at the table, driving reform. When President Trump withdrew from the World Health Organization, the Chinese sent their largest delegation ever to the next meeting. They've contributed $500 million. They're now the biggest contributor. I can understand some of the frustrations or concerns that led to the withdrawal from UNESCO, but in the last Congress, with Israeli support, I led our rejoining UNESCO. We've talked about, you've mentioned earlier today, standard-setting bodies as being essential. How do you balance a budget request that dramatically reduces our contributions to the UN with needing to be at the table to fight for the standards, whether it's telecommunications, civil aviation, intellectual property? You just waved, here's this great big list of organizations. Many of them do critical things. How are you going to strike that balance appropriately, sir?
Thank you, Senator, and it was good to discuss this with you. I will point out in the President's budget request there is funding for IAEA, for the International Civil Aviation Organization, for the Organization Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, for the ITU, for the IMO and Maritime, and so I look forward to working with you and working with this committee on how we make those decisions of where we engage and then how we engage. But I think we're in violent agreement that we have to block and tackle Chinese influence.
Would you pledge to not support just unilateral withdrawal from these organizations?
I will certainly support and follow the Secretary and the President's guidance as we weigh that engagement through these reviews.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts, and congratulations to the nominees, and I especially want to shout out a VMI grad, Congressman Waltz. I want to follow up on Senator Coons' questions on the use of Signal, just to make sure we're all on the same wavelength here. Signal is useful because it's encrypted, and a whole lot of people use Signal, and there's nothing wrong for it. But as far as I know, Signal has not been approved for use by U.S. government officials for the sharing of classified information. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Right. And you indicated...
Thank you for the shout out on VMI, Rob Virginia Bell.
Great institution. You indicated in your testimony that no classified information was shared, and I see nothing in the reporting about your situation to suggest that you shared classified information. I do see the question of, why did your office add the Atlantic reporter? That was an amateurish move, and I'm sure you've learned something from that. But on the question of whether classified information was shared, there are at least two DOD investigations. One, the DOD IG, and the second, Air Force, an investigation ongoing into whether Secretary Hegseth shared classified information. My understanding is those are ongoing. They haven't yet reached a conclusion, but they certainly haven't reached the conclusion that no classified information is shared. Am I wrong about that?
Senator, thank you for the question. I shouldn't and can't comment on ongoing investigations. What I can do is echo Secretary Hegseth's testimony that no names, targets, locations, units, routes, sources, methods, no classified information from his perspective was shared.
I got it. I'm sure Secretary Hegseth says he didn't share any classified information, but the fact of the matter is there are two investigations going on at the Pentagon precisely to determine in an objective and independent way whether classified information was shared. At a minimum, sharing attack plans with sensitive military information that shouldn't have been shared.